My mom's boyfriend hit my brother, and she took his side when I pepper sprayed him. There are houses where being a kid means worrying about homework and crushes and whether your sneakers are still in style. And then there are houses like mine, where at 17 you are balancing the checkbook on the kitchen counter while stirring a pot of pasta so it does not stick. I used to joke that I was the unpaid manager of a very dysfunctional tiny motel, except nobody ever checked out and nobody ever tipped. My mother worked overnight shifts at a hospital about 30 minutes away. My little brother needed more structure and patience than most adults I knew could handle. And the bills on the table had this way of cloning themselves when nobody was looking. My name is Talia, by the way, and if we were sitting on my sagging couch right now with some cheap microwave popcorn between us, this is exactly how I would tell you the story. Because there is no polished, inspirational way to wrap what happened to us. At 17, I had already finished high school early, not because I was some genius, but because I powered through classes and summer credits like my life depended on getting out fast. I was supposed to go straight into college that fall. Instead, I started working full-time as a cashier at a convenience store down the road, because every time I looked at my mother's face when she opened another envelope, my stomach twisted. Most mornings started with me making sure my brother had the right shirt for school that did not itch too much, that his headphones were in his backpack, that his favorite cereal was in the same cabinet it had been yesterday. He is on the spectrum, high-functioning, like the professionals like to say, and he has attention issues on top of it. What that means in real life is that changes hit him like someone pulling the rug under his feet. And if the rug moves too much, everything else comes crashing down. I learned the hard way that if the cereal box moved to a different shelf without warning, we could lose 20 minutes to panic and tears before the bus even turned onto our street. My mother left the apartment when it was still dark, her scrubs rustling, the smell of strong coffee following her out the door. She always looked tired. You know, that deep tired that has nothing to do with how much you slept, and everything to do with how much you carry. She kept saying the night shifts paid a little more, and that the extra money would help us breathe. It never really felt like breathing, though. It felt more like we were underwater, sometimes closer to the surface, sometimes sinking, but never really on solid ground. So I stayed. I put college on hold for a year. And yes, you can laugh at that with me now. Picked up every shift my manager offered and started paying the phone bill and half the groceries. I even learned how to argue kindly with the electric company when they threatened to shut us off. For a while, weirdly, it felt like things were stabilizing. My brother had a therapist who actually seemed to get him, my mother had a small group of coworkers she started talking about, and I had a routine that made me feel like maybe, just maybe, this was what grown life looked like when you started from behind. Then little things started to go off, and I wish I could say I saw it clearly right away, but I did not. It was more like this slow fog seeping into the corners. First, it was the money. I kept a mental log of what I left in my wallet, because when you live close to the edge, every dollar is counted twice. I would get home, drop my bag in the same spot on the counter, and a day later I would be short by a small amount. Not a full paycheck or anything obviously dramatic, just enough to make me second-guess myself. One week it was a 20 missing, then it was smaller bills, then change from the glass jar we kept by the microwave. I assumed I had miscounted. I assumed my memory was off. I assumed everything except the idea that someone might be taking it. Then my mother started snapping at me and my brother over nothing. She had always been tired, sure, and sometimes short-tempered after a long night. But this was different. This was her coming home and going straight from the door to the bathroom, locking it for long stretches, then emerging with a reddened nose and eyes that could not settle. This was her getting angry because the couch blanket was not folded right, or because my brother was humming too loud while he built something with his blocks. The mood swings got sharper. One minute she would be weepy and hugging him, saying she was sorry she missed his school meeting, and the next she was slamming cabinets because I bought the wrong brand of pasta, even though it was on sale. I kept telling myself it was just stress. Overtime. Inflation. Life. I told myself all of that right up until she sat us down at the kitchen table one Tuesday afternoon and announced, with this hopeful brightness that felt painted on, that her new boyfriend was going to move in. I had heard about him in passing. Obviously, little bits dropped into conversations here and there. This guy from work, she would say, or someone who understands the night shift life. I listened, nodded in the right places, and went back to calculating what was left after rent. I never met him properly before that conversation about him moving in. To be fair, I barely saw my mother long enough to have proper conversations at all. So when she said it, when she smoothed her hands over the cheap vinyl tablecloth and smiled in that forced way, my first reaction was not outrage. It was this cold, hard knot in my stomach. My brother was spinning a pencil on the table, the way he does when he is trying not to look at anyone. "Is he nice?" he asked without looking up, voice flat. That is his way of asking if someone is safe. My mother rushed in with, "Of course he is nice. He is amazing. He is going to help with everything, you will see. He said he would help with the rent, and he is really good with kids." The knot in my stomach tightened. People who are really good with kids do not usually need to brag about it through someone else. I wanted to say no. I wanted to slam my hand on the table and say, "Absolutely not, he is not moving in. This is not a revolving door." But here is the thing. I am 17. It is not my name on the lease. It is not my apartment, technically, even though I am paying half the bills and running the whole show while my mother is at work. So instead, I said the weak thing. I said, "How long have you been seeing him?" "A few months," she said, waving her hand like months were nothing. "He has been really supportive, and he knows how hard things have been for us." He offered. "He wants to help with chores and bills." This could be good for us, Talia. There it was. The speech about help. The promise that finally, some weight would come off my shoulders. I wish I could tell you that I did not fall for any of it, that I trusted my gut and put my foot down. I did not. I swallowed my doubts, told my brother we would make sure he was comfortable, and went to strip the tiny storage room to make space for this stranger who was supposedly going to save us. He moved in on a Thursday, dragging in 2 battered duffel bags, a cracked television, and an attitude that filled the room before he did. He hugged my mother like they were in the final scene of some romance movie and clapped me on the shoulder like I was a coworker instead of a kid. "You must be the one keeping this place running," he said, smile a little too wide. "Your mother talks about how responsible you are." He said it like a compliment. It landed like a warning. That first week, he did not even have his own key. He borrowed my mother's when she was home and banged on the door when she was not. Like the rest of us were the lobby staff. He floated through the apartment like he was taking measurements. He opened cabinets without asking, changed the volume on the television while my brother was in the middle of a show, rearranged the couch cushions because he liked them his way. He worked some hours as a driver and spent the rest of his time sprawled in front of the television, dropping crumbs into the cushions I would later vacuum up. He made big statements at dinner about how he was definitely going to start picking up more shifts, and just needed to find the right schedule. Meanwhile, my mother glowed at him like he was a miracle. The very first time my brother asked him for help with homework, he looked over from the couch, sighed dramatically, and said, "You are old enough to figure it out yourself. Kids these days are too spoiled." I remember feeling my ears burn hot. "He asked for help, not for your judgment," I said before I could stop myself. My brother froze in his chair, pencil hovering over the worksheet, eyes darting between us like he had done something wrong just by existing. My mother, washing dishes with her back to us, said, "Can everyone please just relax? It has been a long day. Relax." Sure. Because nothing says relax like watching a grown man dismiss your 8-year-old brother's plea for help like it is an inconvenience. It did not get better from there. If anything, that was the nicest version of him. Over the next few weeks, the truth rolled out in ugly little pieces. He worked just enough hours to make it sound like he was contributing. He talked a lot about the system being unfair when he did not want to pick up extra shifts. He complained about gas prices while eating the food I had bought on sale with my meager paycheck. He would leave empty containers in the fridge so that my brother opened the door, expecting juice, and found nothing but betrayed hope. When I asked him, politely at first, to stop doing that because it was hard on my brother, he laughed and said, "It is good for kids to be disappointed sometimes. Builds character." I started noticing more missing cash. Later, when things were calmer, I realized the money stopped disappearing the exact moment he was gone. Not just from my wallet now, but from the cookie tin where my mother kept her tips, from the envelope tucked behind the cleaning supplies where we stashed rent money, from the wrinkled bills I had hidden in an old shoebox at the back of my closet. I am not an idiot. I knew it was not my brother. He does not take money, and he hates even touching change because he says it smells like metal and strangers. I also knew it was not some ghost. Every time I thought about confronting my mother, though, something stopped me. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, like he was her last shot at being more than just tired. Maybe it was the memory of old stories about her past, about when she had slipped before, and how proud she had been of staying clean. The bathroom became a black hole. My mother and her boyfriend would disappear in there for long stretches, door locked, shower never turning on. Once, when I knocked because my brother had to use the bathroom and was doing that anxious little dance he does, they snapped that they would be out in a minute, and when they finally stepped out, the fan was off. The mirror was not foggy, but there were sprinkled bits of foil in the trash that had not been there before. Later that week, I found similar bits in the pocket of the boyfriend's jacket when I moved it from the back of a chair. My mother started having nosebleeds. She brushed them off as dry air, as allergies, as anything but what they were. Her mood swings went from sharp to chaotic. One night she got home, threw her bag on the floor, wrapped my brother in a hug so tight he squeaked, and told him she loved him more than anything. 2 hours later, she was yelling at him for leaving a cup on the wrong part of the counter, like the cup had offended some god. If you are wondering where my actual father was in all this, join the club. He lived across town, worked a regular job, and had his own set of rules that made his house feel more like a military base than a home. He was the kind of dad who would lecture you for an hour about responsibility and then fix your flat tire without another word. When something crossed the line into actual danger, he usually showed up, even if he complained the whole time. My parents split when I was in middle school. He had never really stepped up for my brother because they are not related by blood, and everyone pretended that made sense even when it did not. He was not a monster, just distant, the kind of man who hides behind rules until reality punches through them. Through all of this, my brother shrank. That is the only way I can describe it. He started moving more silently around the apartment, tiptoeing past the couch when the boyfriend was watching television, asking me in whispers if it was okay to get a snack. He flinched at loud noises he used to tolerate fine. He started asking to sleep on my floor again, just for tonight, until it was every night, his small form wrapped in a blanket near my bed. The boyfriend's words toward him got meaner too. If it were up to me, I would have you doing push-ups every time you forgot something, he would say. Kids like you need discipline. Or, you think life is going to treat you special just because your brain is quirky? Newsflash, kid, nobody cares. Every time I stepped in, you do not talk to him like that, I would say, voice shaking but firm. You are a guest here, remember? He would laugh, tension twisting his mouth, and say something like, guess I forgot you are the boss around here. My mother would murmur from the kitchen, both of you, please stop, without actually taking a stand. I started to feel like the walls of the apartment were leaning in, like the air itself was turning sour. I could not prove anything that would hold up in a court or in front of some official, but I could see what was happening clear as day in the way my brother's hands trembled when the boyfriend walked by, in how my mother's eyes darted around like a trapped animal. I felt this constant hum of dread in my chest, like I was always waiting for a shoe to drop, but I did not know which shoe or from where. The day everything snapped, it was supposed to be a good day. That is the part that still makes my throat tight. My brother had done well on some school assessments, and we had planned a whole small celebration just for us while my mother was at work. I had saved up to buy this little art kit he had been staring at in a store flyer for weeks, the kind with bright colors and stencils and silly stickers. We spread everything out on the kitchen table, put on some music from a random playlist, and I actually caught myself thinking, maybe we can carve out our own pockets of happy, even in this mess. He was carefully pressing a stencil onto an old t-shirt, tongue sticking out a little in concentration, when the little bottle of paint tipped over. It splattered a small patch near the bottom of his shirt and dripped onto the floor. It was water-based, totally washable, no big deal. He froze anyway, like someone had paused him. It is okay, I said right away, grabbing paper towels. We will rinse it in the sink, no problem, it will come out. I went to the bathroom to grab a spray cleaner for the tile, calling over my shoulder for him to just stand still for a second so he did not track paint through the hall. I was still smiling when I opened the cabinet under the sink, still humming along to the music. Then I heard it, a heavy thud, like something hitting the wall, followed by my brother's scream. Not the little frustrated yell he sometimes does. A real scream, the kind that rips out of your body without permission. I dropped the cleaner. My heart went from 0 to 100 so fast my vision tunneled. I ran back to the kitchen and walked straight into my worst nightmare made real. The boyfriend was towering over my brother, face twisted in this ugly, furious snarl, one hand on the back of my brother's neck, pushing him toward the table. My brother's cheek was red, so red, with a distinct handprint blooming there. Tears were streaming down his face, mixing with paint streaks, and he was gasping, saying, I am sorry, like a broken record. What is wrong with you? The boyfriend was yelling. You cannot keep anything clean for 10 seconds. Do you know how much this stuff costs? You are so spoiled. You do whatever you want because everyone is afraid to tell you no. There are moments when something inside you just snaps. This was one of those. My body moved before my brain caught up. I shoved myself between them, forcing his hand off my brother. "Do not touch him," I said, voice low and shaking. "You do not put your hands on him. Ever." "He made a mess," he snapped back, eyes wild. Like that explained anything. "Someone has to teach him consequences." "He is 8, I said. "He does not need consequences. He needs a clean shirt and for you to get away from him." My brother was trembling behind me, little fingers clutching the back of my shirt. I could feel him like a small bird trying to disappear. The boyfriend stepped closer, chest puffed out, trying to clog the space. "You think you are in charge here," he said, leaning in so close I could smell the stale coffee and something sharper on his breath. "You think you can talk to me like that in my own house? It is not your house," I said. "You do not pay the rent. You do not buy the food. You scream at a kid for spilling washable paint. So no, you do not get to claim this place." He took another step forward, and something in his eyes shifted from anger to something colder that scared me more. I realized in a flash that I had no idea what he was capable of when he felt challenged. My hands were shaking so hard I thought I might drop my phone. Instead, I reached for the one thing I had promised myself I would only use if I truly had no other choice. Months before, when my mother had started dating this guy, and I had started feeling that itch of unease, my father had taken me to lunch and, in his classic practical style, handed me a small can of spray to keep on my keychain. "For emergencies," he had said, looking me dead in the eye. "And if you ever need to use it, you are not in trouble with me. Make sure you call the emergency number right after." At the time, I had rolled my eyes and laughed it off as overprotective. I clipped it to my keys anyway. That day in the kitchen, with my brother's cheek burning red and this man towering over us, it did not feel overprotective. It felt like a thin rope hanging over a cliff. "Back up," I said, reaching for my keys on the counter and curling my fingers around the spray. "I am serious. You need to back up right now." He scoffed, stepping even closer, one hand lifting like he might push past me. "Or what?" he sneered. "You going to cry to your mother? You going to call the cops because someone finally told your brother no?" What I did next, I did on adrenaline and pure fear. I popped the little safety cap, aimed badly but sincerely, and pressed down. The spray hit him full in the face. He did not go down in some dramatic movie way, but he did stagger back, cursing and clawing at his eyes. The air burned my own throat and eyes, and for a split second I panicked that I had just made everything worse instead of safer. "You crazy little—" he shouted, but the rest of it dissolved into strangled yells as he stumbled into the counter, knocking over the art supplies. My brother screamed again, this horrible sound that will probably haunt me forever. I grabbed his wrist, dragged him down the hall, and shoved him gently but firmly into my bedroom, locking the door behind him. "Get on the bed," I said, voice high and shaky. "Cover your ears. Do not open this door unless it is me or the police, okay?" He nodded, eyes huge, and crawled under the blanket, pulling it over his head. I could hear the boyfriend raging in the kitchen, bumping into furniture, yelling words I am not even going to repeat. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped my phone twice before I managed to dial the emergency number. The operator's voice was calm in a way that made my panic feel even louder. I told them someone in our home had just hit my 8-year-old brother and was coming at me, that I had sprayed him with what my father gave me, that I was scared he would get to us. I stumbled over my address twice. They told me officers were on their way, to stay in a locked room, and to keep the line open if I could. I know they had told me not to move, to stay put in a locked room, but the thought of him having easy access to this place made my skin crawl. I ran to the front door, heart pounding so hard my vision throbbed, and grabbed my mother's keys off the nail where they always hung, shoving them into my pocket. If he got his hands on those, he would not even have to bang on the door. He could just walk in like he owned the place. Then I went straight back to the hallway by my bedroom door and slid down the wall, phone pressed to my ear, listening to my brother's muffled sobs and the boyfriend's footsteps and curses as he finally fumbled his way out the front door, still yelling that we were going to regret this. Here is another thing I did that probably sounds stupid unless you have lived a version of my life. I called my mother next. While the phone rang, I honestly believed she would say, "You did the right thing. I am coming home, do not worry." I believed that because mothers are supposed to care more about their kids than their boyfriends. I believed it because I needed to. She answered on the second ring, voice groggy. "What is it?" "I am on break." "They are sending the police," I blurted, words tumbling over each other. He hit him, he hit my brother, he left a handprint on his face, I sprayed him, I called the emergency number, I locked us in my room. "You need to come home." There was a long beat of silence, and in that beat, something in my chest cracked. "You sprayed him?" she said finally, voice sharpening. "Why would you do that?" "Because he was hurting him," I said, louder than I planned. "Because he had his hand on his neck and he hit him and he would not back off." "What did you want me to do, Watch?" "You always exaggerate, Talia," she snapped. "You are so dramatic. I told you he has a temper sometimes, but he would never really hurt him. Now you called the police? Do you know what that can do to his record? To my life?" I stared at the wall, feeling like the floor had just dropped out from under me. "He already hurt him," I said, quieter. "He already left a mark." "I cannot leave work," she hissed. "We are short-staffed. I will get written up. Just tell them it was a misunderstanding." "You overreacted. We will talk about this when I get home." The call cut off. I looked at the screen in disbelief, like maybe it would change what she had said if I stared hard enough. The operator confirmed officers were en route and said I could disconnect if I felt safe. I thanked her and hung up, my hands still shaking. When the officers arrived, everything became both too slow and too fast. They took pictures of my brother's cheek, of the scattered art supplies, of the little can of spray on the counter. They asked me to explain over and over what had happened. And every time I told it, it felt more surreal, like I was reading lines from someone else's script. They spoke to my brother softly, asking if he felt safe, if anyone had hurt him before. He stuttered through answers, looking at me like he was afraid of saying the wrong thing. One of the officers asked about my mother. I told them where she worked, that she was on a shift. They tried calling. She did not answer. They told me they could file a report, that they would look for the boyfriend, and explained that my father could file for a temporary protective order on my brother's behalf once he arrived. They also told me, very clearly, that none of this guaranteed he would stay away forever. The temporary protective order came through a few days later. On paper, it meant he had to stay at least 500 feet away from us, from the school, from my father's house. On paper. For the first couple of months, we lived on edge. The order was just paper, and I kept expecting him to show up. He didn't, at least not face-to-face, but he tried to circle back twice, and each time we filed another report. They finally picked him up on an unrelated warrant, and by then there was enough on record to make the consequences stick. I signed my name on forms with a hand that barely felt attached to my body. I watched my brother hold an ice pack to his cheek while answering questions he should never have had to answer. I listened to the officers talk about next steps, like we were planning a school project instead of trying to keep a grown man from coming back to finish what he started. After they left, the apartment was too quiet. My brother sat on my bed, eyes red, fiddling with the string of his hoodie. "Is he coming back?" he asked. "Not if I can help it," I said. "I am going to fix this, I promise." I meant it, but I had no idea how nearly impossible that promise would be to keep. My mother came home hours later, after her shift, after the police, after the adrenaline had worn off, and left me feeling like my bones were filled with sand. She did not rush in worried. She did not run to check on my brother. She walked in with her bag on her shoulder, jaw tight, eyes already blazing. "What did you do?" she demanded as soon as the door clicked shut behind her. "I protected him," I said, pointing to my brother, who was half hiding behind me. "He hit him. There is a report. There are pictures. The officers—" "You called the police on my boyfriend," she cut in, voice shaking. "Do you have any idea what you just did to my life? To our life?" "He did that when he put his hands on him," I said. "I did not do this. He did. You were not here. Someone had to step up." She looked at me like I had slapped her. "You think you know everything? Do you? You think because you pay a few bills and babysit your brother that you get to run this house?" Babysit. The word stung more than I cared to admit. "I am not babysitting," I said, voice cracking. "I am raising him with you. I have been keeping this house afloat while you were wherever you have been lately." Her eyes flicked away at that. Just for a second. Toward the bathroom. Toward the tiny scraps of foil I had fished out of the trash. Then they snapped back. "You are just a child," she said. "You do not understand grown problems. He is trying. You embarrassed him. You embarrassed me. Do you know how hard it is to find someone who accepts my situation?" It clicked then, fully, painfully, what I had been trying not to see. This was not just about love or companionship for her. This was about having someone who would share her vices, who would make her feel less alone in her worst habits. Someone who would co-sign her decisions, so she did not have to admit, even to herself, how far she had slipped. In that equation, my brother and I were obstacles, not priorities. "I understand enough," I said quietly. I understand that he uses. I understand that you went back to using too. I understand that you chose him over your son when I told you he hurt him." She went still, and for a second I saw the old version of her flicker in her eyes, the one who used to make pancakes in silly shapes on my birthdays and braid my hair before school. Then her face hardened. "You do not get to talk to me like that in my house," she said. It was funny, in the worst way, how many people wanted to remind me it was not my house, considering I was the one actually acting like it was a home worth protecting. "Okay," I said. "Then we will get out of your house." She laughed, this harsh, disbelieving sound. "Where are you going to go, princess? You think your father is going to take you both in? You think he wants to deal with all this?" The thing about people who underestimate you is that they often forget you have been making contingency plans in your head for months while they were busy underestimating you. I had already called my father from the bathroom right after the officers left, in that tiny sliver of time before my mother came home. I had already told him everything in one long, shaking rush. I had already heard the shock in his voice turn into something hard and determined. I had already heard him say, "Pack what you need. I will be there first thing in the morning. We will figure it out." "I already asked him," I said, holding her gaze. He said yes. The fight that followed was not pretty. There were accusations thrown like knives. Words we cannot ever take back. Years of resentment and disappointment condensed into one explosive night. She called me ungrateful, dramatic, disloyal. I called her selfish, reckless, absent. My brother sat on the couch, knees drawn up to his chest, hands over his ears, eyes squeezed shut. At some point, she stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the picture frames on the wall. It was late enough that the neighbors were probably listening through the thin walls. But at that moment, shame was somewhere far below survival on my list of feelings. I spent the rest of the night packing, not the slow, careful packing you do when you are excited to move, the frantic kind where you shove clothes and school supplies and important documents into trash bags and old suitcases, trying to make sure you do not forget birth certificates or medical records or the one stuffed animal that still calms your brother down on the worst nights. Every item I packed felt like saying goodbye. This was supposed to be a temporary stop on the way to my adult life, and here I was leaving it like a crime scene. Most of the furniture and dishes stayed behind. My father said he would deal with the landlord later, that losing a deposit and a couch was better than gambling with my brother's safety. My father showed up in the morning with coffee, a tight jaw, and extra boxes. He did not say much to my mother. She was there, hovering in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes tired and wild. They exchanged a few bitter words about custody and responsibilities, but the real conversation was in the way she would not meet my brother's eyes and the way he clung to my hand until his knuckles turned white. "You do not have to do this," she said to me as we carried the last bag out. "You are overreacting. It was one bad argument." "It was not one anything," I said. "And even if it was, once is enough. He hit him. That is my line." The thing about lines is that once you finally draw them, you realize how long you have been letting people blur them. We drove to my father's house in near silence. My brother fell asleep in the back seat, head leaning awkwardly against the window, the faint outline of the fading handprint still visible on his cheek. My father gripped the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. I stared out the window at the same streets I had driven through my whole life, feeling like I was seeing them from outside my own skin. Living at my father's place was not some magical escape into stability. I am not pretending it was perfect. It was better in some crucial ways, yes. There were no late-night bathroom sessions that made the whole house smell suspicious. There were no men yelling at my brother for existing. There was food in the fridge that stayed where you left it. But my father is not exactly the soft, understanding type. He believes in rules and schedules and bootstraps and all those things that sound good in theory until you apply them to a traumatized 8-year-old and his burnt-out older sister. He set expectations right away. "You can stay here as long as you are in school or working," he said. "House rules apply. Curfew is 10 p.m. on weekdays, midnight on weekends, no exceptions. I will help with your brother because someone has to, but I am not signing up to raise another child alone. We will look into some legal options, but this is not simple." Legal options. I could feel a headache forming just hearing the words. My father started making calls, asking around, looking up helplines for people who could not afford fancy lawyers. He found a legal aid clinic that took on family cases like ours with payment plans that would not completely crush us. While he did the paperwork and phone calls, I handled the day-to-day stuff, enrolling my brother in a new school, transferring his therapy, figuring out bus routes. adjusting him to a new room where the shadows were different and the sounds from the street did not match the ones he knew. I still worked at the convenience store, taking the bus back to our old neighborhood for my shifts. Every time I stepped off near our old apartment building, my chest tightened. I half expected to see my mother's boyfriend lurking around a corner, waiting. I kept my spray tucked in my bag, fingers brushing it more often than was probably necessary. The legal process was exactly the kind of drawn-out, draining mess you would expect. We met with a lawyer in a cramped office that smelled like old coffee and toner. She asked us to lay out everything from the beginning. I had to tell the story of that day in the kitchen several more times. And every time I did, I heard my voice wobble in parts I thought I had numbed. She talked about petitions and temporary guardianship and the difference between physical and legal custody in a way that made my head spin. She also talked about my mother's history, about the fact that she had gotten clean once before and might use that in her favor, about how the system is reluctant to sever ties completely. I was terrified that they would take my brother and place him with strangers while the adults figured things out. I had been in that situation as a kid, when my mother had messed up badly enough the first time to get child services involved. I remembered the scratchy sheets at the emergency placement house, the way the adults talked around me like I was a case file. Not a person. I could not let that happen to him. Our lawyer explained that because my father was willing to step in as a guardian and had a stable job and housing, the court would likely see him as a viable placement. The catch, of course, was that he is not biologically related to my brother. The social worker's report made it easier. Stable housing and continuity mattered more than blood, and disrupting my brother's routine again would have done real damage. And it raised the obvious question everyone keeps asking: where was my mother's side of the family? The honest answer was that there was not anyone safe or willing to step in. Some were nowhere to be found, others had their own chaos, and none of them showed up when it mattered. So the court wanted to make sure the actual biological father was not going to suddenly appear and make claims. That meant tracking him down, or at least proving that he could not be found and had abandoned his responsibilities. In the end, he never responded to anything and never showed up, and the court treated it like what it was: abandonment on paper and in real life, which takes time, and paperwork, and patience none of us really had left. While the grown-ups did their phone calls and forms, life went on. My brother was enrolled in a new summer program for kids with special needs. The intake form was about 12 pages long, and by the end of filling it out, my hand cramped and my brain buzzed. I had to list every meltdown trigger, every calming strategy that worked at home, every medication, every emergency contact. I left the section about authorized pickup adults blank for a long time, staring at it like the paper might catch fire. I put my name. I put my father's. When I brought the form to the front desk, the coordinator smiled and said, "You forgot your mother." I swallowed, felt my cheeks burn, and said, "She is not allowed to pick him up right now. There is a situation." I did not go into detail. I did not owe them my whole life story, even if they looked at me like they were curious. "Do you have a court order?" she asked. "Not yet," I admitted. "We are in the process." She gave me that tight, sympathetic smile people give when they think you are in over your head. "Well, without documentation, if she comes in and proves she is his mother, we cannot legally stop her from taking him," she said. I nodded, thanked her, walked out to the parking lot, and had a full-blown panic spiral in the front seat of my father's car. I pictured my mother showing up with the boyfriend in tow, saying all the right things, charming the staff, and walking out with my brother while I stood there helpless. That was enough for me to yank him out of the program before he even started. At that point, my mother did not even have my father's address, and we were keeping it that way on purpose. A public program felt like a billboard. Our house, with locked doors and one trusted person inside, felt like the only place we could actually control. Our lawyer had already warned me that without a signed order, staff could not really stop my mother from taking him if she showed up and pushed, and I could not live with that gamble. I told them something came up. They looked annoyed. I did not care. I took him home, and we spent the rest of the day building towers out of cardboard boxes in the living room. Stability was better than services if the services could not keep him safe. Of course, pulling him out meant I missed work. Missing work meant losing money. Losing money meant watching my father's jaw clench when he went through his own stack of bills at the table that night. "We cannot do this forever," he said. "I am not 20 anymore. I cannot pick up a second job at night like I used to. You need to go back to school in the fall like you planned. This is not a permanent solution." "I know," I said, even though the idea of juggling classes, work, and my brother's needs made my chest tighten. "I will figure something out." We did what so many families do when the system wants a slow, tidy process, and life demands immediate action. We patched things together with duct tape and hope. A friend of mine from high school who lived nearby and did not have a summer job yet agreed to hang out with my brother a few afternoons a week while I was at work. I wrote out long lists of instructions, printed out his emergency plan, left my phone charging like a lifeline. I called to check in on my breaks, listening for any sign of distress in his voice. The first time a social worker came to evaluate my father's house, I felt like I was on trial for crimes I had not committed. She walked through every room, making notes on a clipboard, looking in the fridge, checking for smoke detectors. She asked me how often my brother bathed, what his bedtime was, how we handled discipline. She asked if anyone in the house used substances, which made my father snort in offended disbelief. She asked me in a quieter voice when we sat at the dining table if I felt safe here. I wanted to laugh. Safe is such a relative word. I told her I was safer here than where we had been. I told her I did not want my brother back in that apartment as long as that man was around. I also told her, maybe more honestly than she expected, that this was not easy, that my father had a short fuse, that he did not always get my brother's meltdowns, that I often felt like a translator between them. I saw her write something down at that. I have no idea what. 2 weeks later, the first court hearing was held in a room that was colder than any place has a right to be in summer. My mother was there, wearing a blouse I had never seen before, hair done nicely, makeup covering the dark circles under her eyes. She looked, from the outside, like a mom who had her life together. If you did not know the context, you would think she was there for a school assembly, not a custody hearing. She did not look at me at first. When she finally did, there was this flash of something in her eyes that hurt more than her words had. Betrayal. Like I had done this to her. Like I was the one who had broken something sacred. The judge heard preliminary statements from the attorneys, brows raised in mild concern but not exactly shock. Our lawyer talked about the incident, about the report, about the photos of my brother's cheek, about the prior history of my mother's substance use and recovery. My mother's representative emphasized that it had been one isolated incident, that she was committed to working on herself, that she loved her children deeply, that her boyfriend was seeking help too. They said those phrases like they were reading from a script. Maybe they were. I sat there on a hard bench, hands pressed between my knees, feeling like a kid again, watching adults talk about me like I was not even in the room, except this time I refused to stay entirely silent. When our lawyer asked me if I wanted to make a statement, I said yes before my fear could say no. I stood up, walked to the little podium, and told the judge in my own unsteady words what had happened, not just that one day, but for months. I talked about my brother's anxiety, about the way he had started sleeping in my room again, about the foil and the nosebleeds and the money disappearing. I tried to keep my voice steady, but somewhere in there, it cracked. My mother cried while I spoke. I do not know if they were real tears of remorse or tears of embarrassment or anger, or probably a mix of all three. The judge listened, nodded, and said that the situation was concerning, that the child's safety was paramount, that they would issue temporary orders while further evaluation happened. It all sounded so clinical. What it meant, practically, was that my brother would stay with my father for now, that my mother's contact would be supervised or limited, that the boyfriend was legally supposed to stay away. None of that changed the daily grind of keeping a traumatized kid afloat. The supervised visits never really became a routine. She showed up once, late, and my brother shrank into himself the whole time. After that, she missed the next appointment, then stopped answering the coordinator entirely. My brother stopped asking. I stopped waiting. My brother started at his new school that fall with a plan in place. Accommodations, check-ins, a teacher who had at least read his file. I started at a local college on a scholarship that felt like a ticket out and a chain around my ankle at the same time. I commuted from my father's house, waking up early to get my brother ready, dropping him off, heading to campus, pulling shifts at the store on weekends. My life turned into this relentless rotation of lecture halls, cashier counters, therapy waiting rooms, and late-night homework at the kitchen table while my brother lined up his toy cars beside my notebook. There were days when I handled it all, sort of. There were days when I snapped. Like the day the fire alarm went off at my brother's school during a drill and he melted down so hard they called me. Not my father, even though his name was on the main contact list. I left a test halfway done, sprinted across campus, and arrived to find him under a desk, hands over his ears, rocking, his teacher standing nearby looking helpless. "We did not know the alarm would be so loud," she said, as if that made it better. I crawled under the desk with him, wrapped my arms around him, whispered the breathing routine we had practiced. My jeans got dusty, my exam grade tanked, and some part of me cracked a little more. On the ride home, after we both calmed down, he apologized for ruining my school thing. I had to pull over to the side of the road because I could not see through my own tears. At home, when I tried to explain to my father why I had missed the exam, he shook his head. "You cannot keep dropping everything every time he has a bad day," he said. "Life does not work like that. You are going to lose your scholarship if you keep doing this." "What was I supposed to do?" I asked. "Let him sit under the desk alone? Wait for you to get off work in 3 hours?" He did not have a good answer. He had frustration. He had fear. He had worry about bills and my future and his own aging body. I had all of that too, plus the suffocating weight of being my brother's primary safe person. Somewhere in the middle of the legal mess, my mother started texting me. At first, it was these long, rambling messages about how she was in a program now, how she was doing the work, how she had slipped up but was better, how she missed us, how we were her whole world. She sent pictures of certificates from meetings, of pamphlets from counseling, of inspirational quotes. She wrote things like, "Please do not let them turn you against me." I did my best. Part of me wanted to throw my phone across the room. Another part wanted to go back in time, before everything, and hug the version of her that existed only in my old memories. I replied once, carefully. I said I was glad she was getting help, that my brother was safe where he was, that maybe in the future, if she stayed stable, we could talk about visits with clear boundaries. That small crack in the door was apparently all she needed. The next messages came faster, sharper. "You think you are so much better than me now?" she wrote. "You stole my son. You always wanted to be his mother instead of his sister. You are letting your father brainwash you. You made a huge deal out of one little slap. Parents discipline their kids all the time." I stared at the word slap for a long time. I thought about my brother's face that day, about his scream. I did not reply. I showed the messages to our lawyer instead. She sighed and said they were both helpful and risky, that they showed my mother's lack of insight, but also her attempts to frame herself as a victim. Around that time, my brother's school called again. This time, it was about my mother showing up on the sidewalk across the street at dismissal time, standing just far enough away that staff could not technically tell her to leave, watching the kids come out. One of the aides recognized her from a picture in the file and reported it. She did not magically guess where he went. She dug through old enrollment papers and called the district until someone let the name of his new school slip. Because if there is one thing my mother knows how to do, it is dig up information when she wants something. The school was on edge. The social worker was concerned. My father was livid. "Why did you even reply to her?" he asked me that night. "You gave her hope. You made her think she still has a say." "She does still have a say," I said. "She is his mother." He slammed his hand on the table, making the forks rattle. "She gave up that right when she let that man hurt him," he said. "You cannot keep dancing around it." He was not wrong. I hated that he was not wrong. I also hated that it felt like every decision I made had the power to blow up in our faces. Meanwhile, my grades started slipping. It turns out you can only miss so many classes for court dates, school emergencies, and sudden therapy schedule changes before your professors start to notice. One sent me a polite but pointed email about attendance. Another pulled me aside after class and asked if everything was okay at home in that concerned tone that made me want to scream. I nodded, smiled, said I was just juggling a lot. Understatement of the century. When the letter from the college arrived, I opened it at the kitchen table with my brother doing math next to me. It said I had been placed on academic probation due to low grades and missed assignments. It said if I did not improve, I could lose my scholarship. My vision blurred. The words danced. My brother looked up and said, "Is that bad?" I laughed and cried at the same time, which, let me tell you, is not a good look. I met with the academic advisor, this overworked woman with kind eyes and a coffee stain on her blouse. I told her as much as I could without collapsing in her office. She listened, nodded, and said we could adjust my course load, that I could take fewer classes, that there were options. Options always come with a cost, though. Fewer classes meant taking longer to graduate, which meant more years of juggling everything. At that point, though, speed was a luxury I did not have. Survival was the priority. I managed to keep my scholarship by switching to part-time status, which meant 4 years would turn into 6, but at least the financial aid would still cover tuition. Around the same time, our lawyer called with news. My mother, through her lawyer, agreed to a court-supervised guardianship arrangement that kept my brother living with my father long-term, with any contact from her tied to treatment milestones and strict supervision. On paper, they called it temporary emergency guardianship at first, But everyone in the room knew it was really about giving my brother the only safe placement he had. It was presented like some kind of victory. The judge had our whole mess laid out in front of them. Reports from the social worker, proof there was no safe relative on my mother's side, and years of records showing my father had been the only consistent adult in my life. So in the end, it was less about blood and more about who actually showed up. My brother could stay with us permanently. There would be no more surprise visitation demands. On paper, it was exactly what we had been fighting for. In reality, it landed like a stone in my stomach. Some stubborn, hopeful piece of me that had held on to the idea of her getting it together finally had to admit defeat. She chose the path that required the least personal change and the most legal convenience. She chose programs and probation and whatever deal her representative had worked out. She did not choose us. We heard later that her boyfriend had taken a plea deal too, that he would serve some time, not much, and be out with mandatory counseling and conditions. I pictured him walking out of some building someday, free to start over while we were still picking splinters out of our lives. It did not feel like justice. It felt like those times when customers at my job shouted at me for things that were not my fault, then walked out with their snacks anyway. All I cared about was that his name came with consequences, and our address stopped feeling like an invitation. 3 months into the process, papers got signed. Almost a year after that day in the kitchen, orders became final. Final enough that school and doctors stopped asking questions every week, and my father's name finally carried the weight it needed to. The court formally recognized my father as my brother's guardian. His name went on school forms and medical records where my mother's used to be. I kept mine as the emergency contact, the one who actually showed up most of the time. Our daily life shifted from crisis mode to something that looked, from the outside, like regular struggle. I still fought with my father about curfew and chores and how many times I could reasonably ask for gas money. He still complained about being tired and old and not having planned for another round of child raising. My brother still had meltdowns when things changed too fast. Still needed headphones in loud places. Still slept on my floor some nights when the shadows in his room felt wrong. We started building new routines. Friday night frozen pizza, Saturday morning library trips, Sunday afternoon grocery runs. I kept going to therapy sessions through a program at my college. At first, I sat there in silence, arms crossed, waiting for the counselor to give me some canned advice I could roll my eyes at. Instead, she mostly asked questions and let me talk. It was weirdly disarming, saying things like, "I am mad that I had to be the adult when I was still a kid," out loud. I said, "I feel guilty all the time, like I should be doing more, like I messed up everything." And she did not argue or lecture. She just asked where that voice came from. We traced it back through years of being told I was dramatic or too sensitive whenever I called out something that hurt. The nightmares I had about the boyfriend's face started to fade, slowly. They were replaced sometimes by dreams where my mother showed up at our door, healthy and stable, asking to come in. I would wake up from those with my cheeks wet and my chest aching, mourning something that was never fully real. We heard through mutual acquaintances that my mother had been in and out of programs, that she had periods of doing well and then vanished for a while, that she talked about us sometimes, painting herself as a tragic figure. I did not verify any of it. I blocked her number after one too many late-night texts that swung from apology to accusation in the span of a few sentences. My brother stopped asking about her every day. Then he stopped asking every week. Eventually, he only brought her up in small, sideways ways like, "Do you think she remembers how I like my sandwiches?" I would say, "I do," and that had to be enough. I wish I could wrap this up with some neat conclusion. And that is how everything turned out fine. It is not fine. It is better, but better is not the same as fine. Some days I drag myself out of bed and do the whole routine and feel like a functioning human. Other days, the weight of it all sits on my chest and I have to bargain with myself to take even one step. My brother is doing better in some ways. He has a small group of kids at school who accept his quirks. He joined a little club where they build things with their hands, and he laughs more freely now. He also has moments where he looks over his shoulder when a stranger raises their voice, moments where he flinches at certain tones, and those are scars I cannot erase. I am still in college, taking fewer classes per semester, accepting that my timeline will look different from my peers. I work part-time, study when my brother is asleep, and occasionally remember that I am allowed to have my own life outside of being his protector. I have started to think about what I might want to do long-term, maybe something with kids like him, maybe something that makes the system suck a little less for families like ours. Or maybe I will just find a job that pays enough for a small place where my brother can have a room of his own and we can paint the walls whatever color we want. Not everything has to be some grand purpose. Over time, my father learned how to meet us halfway. He still has a short fuse, and he still flinches whenever someone touches the thermostat. He still makes a face when my brother refuses certain textures of food, and I end up making 2 versions of dinner. But he also started trying in quiet ways that felt like apologies he did not know how to say out loud. He went to a workshop once about parenting kids with sensory needs, grumbling the whole time, and came back with this handout covered in highlighter marks. He left it on the fridge like a quiet apology. One Saturday, I came home from a short shift at the store and found my father and my brother on the living room floor, surrounded by pieces of some ridiculously complicated build-it-yourself project they had clearly messed up 3 times already. My father was holding the instructions upside down, my brother was patiently flipping them around, and they were both laughing. Actual laughing, not that forced polite chuckle. I stood there for a second, unseen, and something in my chest loosened. This was not the life I thought we would have, but it was a life where my brother could laugh on the living room floor without flinching at every sound. Sometimes people ask me, in careful, tiptoeing ways, if I regret calling the police. They do not say it that bluntly, of course. They say things like, "Do you ever wish you had tried to handle it without getting the law involved?" Or, "Do you think there was another way that would not have blown up your family like that?" I know they are really asking if I feel guilty. The answer is yes and no. Yes, I carry guilt like it is part of my skin, because that is what happens when you grow up parenting your own parent. And no, I do not regret it for 1 second. If I had done nothing that day, if I had let my fear of being dramatic or too much win, I would have to live with something worse than guilt. I would have to live with the knowledge that I watched someone hurt my brother and stayed silent. I also know now that our family was already blown up long before any officer stepped through our door. The only thing that changed that day was that the cracks became visible to people outside our walls. That is uncomfortable. That invites judgment and opinions and gossip. But pretending everything is fine while a kid shrinks into himself is not love. It is denial dressed up as loyalty. Every once in a while, when my brother is in bed and the house is finally quiet and I am too wired from late classes or a long shift to sleep, I let my mind wander to the version of my life I thought I would have by this age. The one where my mother stayed clean, where she met someone stable and kind, or maybe just stayed single and got really into houseplants. Where I left for college with a used suitcase and came back on holidays to a home that did not smell like chemicals or fear. In that version, I am not juggling medication refills and school meetings and tuition bills all at once. I am just a regular, almost adult complaining about finals and bad campus food. I grieve that version sometimes. People act like once you accept reality, you can't miss what never was. But both things can be true at once. I can be grateful for the safety we have now and still be sad for what we never got. Those 2 things can live in the same body at the same time. Trust me, I am full of conflicting feelings. That is the whole story. No grand ending, no inspirational bow. Just a kid who got tired of being told she was dramatic and finally drew a line. And an 8-year-old who deserved a home that did not feel like walking on broken glass.